Hey Grande Alive, this is Coffee with Will, and today I'm here with Jamie McLeod-Skinner, who is a representative or a candidate for the Congressional District 2, Central and Eastern Oregon, coming up next year, and she's here today to talk to me a little bit about herself and some of the issues. And the cool thing about this episode is that normally Starkey Coffee provides the coffee for this show, so big shout out to them. But today, when she walked in the front door of Grande Alive, she brought AfriCafe. Now, in case you're wondering what AfriCafe is, Jamie spent some time when she was younger in Africa, and AfriCafe is a coffee blend that is brewed in Tanzania. And she said, Will, I was guessing that you were a coffee person, and she said rightly, and so I thought I would bring you some coffee to try. And so today we're drinking AfriCafe on Coffee with Will. So thank you so much for bringing me coffee.
Happy to. You mentioned Starkey Cafe, but I know these types of shows can only operate with sponsors. So who are your sponsors?
My sponsors are Northwest Furniture and Mattress, a cute little furniture store right in downtown La Grande, Ronde Hospital, our local hospital, EONI, Eastern Oregon Network Inc., where you can buy local internet, Anything to Digital, which is any type of old media to new media, right here. It's a subsidiary of Brent Cloud Media Services, as is Grande Alive. Valley Realty, a great little realty office owned by Anita Fager. Country Financial, who Paul Swigert, he does insurance, so go down and visit him. And also, last but certainly not least, Schwab Tire, and they're down off of Adams Avenue, and they do great tire service. So, that being said, let's get into the conversation. Tell me, how did you get here? You've lived outside of the United States. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Yeah, I was actually born in Wisconsin and lived in rural communities most of my life. And when I was 9 years old, my mom, who's a teacher, took a teaching job in Tanzania. And so that's what took us to East Africa for a few years. And then we returned to the States when I was in high school and moved to Oregon, and so I finished high school in Southern Oregon.
Oh, cool! Yeah. So you're a local person. You have spent a lot of your childhood in Oregon.
Yeah, my high school years I spent in Oregon. Yeah,
Very cool.
Actually, this is my great pride because I was an athlete in high school.
What was your sport?
I did soccer, track, and basketball,
okay.
And I still hold the 800-meter track record
Wow.
for Ashland. All these years later.
That's a big city to still hold a record for.
But it's kind of sad, these little things that stick with us. But it was fun. It was fun. But
That's
it was
cool.
Something I really enjoyed when I was a kid.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, you also spent some time in Bosnia doing infrastructure work. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, after getting degrees in engineering and planning, I began my public service in Bosnia, also worked in Kosovo. So it was just after the war had ended, and the place was devastated. Mm-hmm. And so my job, working for a humanitarian organization, was to go in and help rebuild schools and hospitals. And so I managed a reconstruction project. And then I went to Kosovo just before the war started there, and designed water and sanitation systems in rural villages. And so while I did not serve in uniform myself, I worked with our troops to secure the peace and developed a profound respect for what our troops do and the fact we need to take care of our vets when they come home.
Wow. So now that all being said, you have spent a lot of time doing work in really torn up countries. What are some things that you learned while you were out of the United States that maybe we can apply here? Infrastructure
is key. And it all comes down to developing the infrastructure so our families and our businesses can thrive. So I spent a couple years over in Bosnia and Kosovo, and then I came back to the States and worked in public service as a city planner and as an environmental planner here in the States, actually on the West Coast. The environmental planning work I did was for a regional water agency. So a lot of my work has been around water.
Wow.
And that's something.
Well, water's important. I mean, it's very important to everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we just kind of toss it around, flush it down the toilet, but it really is very essential to everything we do.
Our day-to-day life, business, agriculture, it's fundamental. So that's something that is a real focus of mine.
Very cool. So, and maybe, is that something that maybe we take for granted over here in the West? Or is it something, how does that apply to us over here?
Well, I think it's more taken for granted on the wet side of the state,
Yeah.
not so much out here, because obviously for our agricultural sector, we're very focused on water. even for day-to-day living. Folks who have wells, instead of being tapped into the municipal system, they need to worry about dropping groundwater tables, and has been an issue, and it is an issue actually throughout Eastern Oregon. That's a rising concern here in Union County. It's a big issue in Harney County. So we have to figure out how to manage our water resources so we can continue to be successful.
So now, that all being said, I mean, this is, when I was doing some research on you last night, in my typical will throw it together kind of fashion, I noticed, and this is a very interesting take on the position of government. You base your beliefs about the position of government on the preamble of the Constitution, which states, and I am not going to get this exactly right, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that essentially the government's responsibility is to provide a military security, just laws, as well as a healthy infrastructure that's conducive to growth. And did I kind of get that generally right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I look at the preamble and the kind of three main things I take out of it. In terms of government, I believe government needs to know when to help out and when to get out of the way.
Sure.
And
that's kind of the question of politics,
exactly.
is when for government to get in there and help, and when for it to just kind of step back and let it do its thing.
Exactly. Because I think it's mostly up to us. I mean, people, I don't care what your political affiliation is. Everyone's concerned about their family. They're concerned about putting food on the table. They're concerned about their community being healthy and strong.
Sure, yeah.
And so that's really my focus. And I think the importance of the starting point, looking at the preamble of the Constitution, is that's kind of our rule book for our government.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the question of government's role. So I think the security and safety piece is really important, and I've got some ideas on that I list on my website. And my website's just my last name, McLeod-Skinner.com.
Sure.
I also have the ideas on just laws, because yes, we are a nation of laws, but they should also be just laws. And so how do we grapple with that and make sure our laws are fair to our communities and to the people in our country? And then the infrastructure piece, I think, is the main piece.
Yeah, well, and that's where your background is.
Yeah, so there's the physical infrastructure piece, but there's also the social infrastructure piece. And the physical infrastructure is our roads and our bridges, and I would also say in the information age, internet access and making sure that happens. And then our social infrastructure is things like our schools and also healthcare. So I happen to believe that all Americans should have access to healthcare. We're a wealthy nation, and I think that's something the government should make happen.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about all that for me is that, the Constitution is generally held up by conservatives as sort of this, gold standard by which all government practice should be done. It's a very sort of like looking back, but you on the other hand, you are a Democrat. You're running on the Democratic ticket.
Yep.
But you also start from that same point of, yes, the Constitution is sort of our rule book, as you said it.
Absolutely.
But you have taken sort of an interesting twist on the preamble of saying, hey, it is the government's responsibility to provide certain parts of infrastructure, including healthcare, to make it genial and healthy for growth.
Well, it says right in there to also provide for the general welfare. That's part of the preamble of the Constitution. And so there's, in my view on that, is help folks who are really struggling, help to get them on their feet. I'm a big fan of self-sufficiency, but when folks are really struggling, how do we get them back on their feet so that they can be providing for themselves and self-sufficient? And so you say it's my twist in the Constitution. I'd argue that someone else has taken another twist in the Constitution, because the words are right there.
Sure.
But it is essentially, those are our founding documents. I have a profound respect for the genius of our founding fathers.
Sure.
And I also, it was really my time in Bosnia and Kosovo that instilled in me a profound respect for our democracy. Before then, when I was younger, I found I would be really critical of the government. And we all should be. I mean, there's things the government does well, there's things the government doesn't do well.
Sure.
But that experience instilled in me the belief that if I'm not happy with it, I need to try to get involved, try to make it better. The other thing with our form of government is there are a lot of really bad options out there. There's
always a lot of bad options out there. If the coffee aisle can tell us anything about that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But our democracy, as imperfect as it is, and we can all point at things that are imperfect about it, It's really a brilliant system of government, and it's the best imperfect system out there.
That was Winston Churchill, right? That said that?
It may be.
Yeah,
if he did, okay.
Yeah,
then,
something like that.
yeah,
Anyways, but yes, I've heard that before.
So
yes.
it's a great form of government. I'll credit whoever said that. But it's on us as Americans to hold our government accountable and to get involved when we don't think the government's doing the right thing for our communities. Because it comes down again to our families and our communities. And if that's what we're focused on, that's what's really the bottom line. The other thing, when you mentioned about conservative versus progressive or
liberal, whatever you want to call it, yeah.
So for me, it comes down to two folks in my family, my aunt and my uncle. And I love them both dearly, and they're both incredible people who have done amazing things for our country and our communities.
Sure.
And she is one of the most liberal people I've ever met, and he is one of the most conservative people I've ever met.
Yes.
And and that's really true of our country, that's true of our communities, that's true of this district.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes us Americans. I mean, the beauty of our country.
So we're different.
We're different.
Yeah.
And so if we can remember that and focus on that and bring the best of those two sides out, we win.
Wow. So that being said, you're someone who's running in the progressive Democratic ticket in a historically conservative district, which I didn't know before today runs pretty much all the way through, all the way from, I believe it's like in the Dalles area, all the way over to
Hood River,
Eastern Oregon.
To Idaho, north to south, so all of Eastern Oregon, all of Central Oregon, and Southern Oregon as well.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And that's one of 5 districts in Oregon,
Yeah.
Grande alive. So it's a very big district, which has made, makes me have immense respect for, people who are running for that, who have to drive so much to go and visit all the constituents. Now, that being said, from what I'm gathering here, you seem to be a person who is running on the Democratic ticket, but also has sympathies and is open and is genial to people on the conservative ticket. That being said, if elected, how are you going to go about representing a district that has been very historically conservative?
Well, if you look at the district, and it's a huge district, it's 70,000 square miles, just shy of that. It includes both incredibly conservative areas and incredibly liberal areas. I mean, you have Ashland, you have Hood River, you have Bend, which is now really transitioning to much more liberal or progressive, whatever you're going to call it. We also have very conservative areas, and we have other areas that have, a mix of folks. And I think a lot of folks, bottom line, even traditional Republicans, it's about being fiscally responsible and then otherwise letting people alone. Leave people to live their lives. And that's really more kind of my view. I've served in elected office before, and I was, it was about being fiscally responsible. Taxpayers work hard for their money, so if you're going to spend their money, invest it. Don't just spend it, invest it. And invest it in ways that are good for the community. And in ways you can look someone in the eye and say, I spent your money this way, and here's why. And if you can't answer that question, you need to not be spending people's money, because it is someone else's money. But to your point, it's about reaching out to folks, getting out throughout the district and talking to folks, and then just making sure that the needs of people throughout the district are being met. And when you talk about solving community problems, these political labels go away. When you're talking about a dropping groundwater table in Harney County, you tell me, is groundwater Republican or Democrat or independent?
Well, I think it's Native American.
That's true.
But it is none of those. It is none of those. It is all of those.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Is it really comes down to what do we need to have our communities be successful? And my philosophy is I don't care who comes up with the idea, what letter is after their name, what their political affiliation is. If it's a good idea, let's implement it. If it's a bad idea, let's not implement it.
It reminds me of I'm going to try and remember this. William James, I believe his name was, and it was a philosophy of, was it pragmatism? I think it's pragmatism. And essentially what it said was, of all the philosophies of the world, take them all, put them together, adopt the right parts of each one, and then you'll have a right philosophy. Something like that.
Yeah.
So that's very cool, and I'm very, as someone who is sympathetic with a libertarian ideal, just sitting down and talking with you, that puts me as someone who is sympathetic with that people group and finds myself oriented towards that people group, comfortable with you being in office and those kinds of things. So that's very cool. So that all being said, what's your plan when is the election? Remind me when the election is.
So there's a primary. Both the Democrats and Republicans have a primary in mid-May of next year, so May 15th, and then the general election will be in November of next year, so almost a year from now.
Very cool. So we got a little while.
We got a little time. But it all goes really quick.
Absolutely. So that being said, I don't think I asked you, what do you do in Bend outside of your political aspirations?
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate that right now I'm able to do this full time.
Oh, very
so
cool.
I'm traveling around the district. Yeah, so in the past, more recently, I worked as a city administrator. I also, I worked, going back to my timeline, when I came back to the States, I worked with a lot of diverse communities for a while. I worked with organizational development for community-based organizations. I worked as a city planner. I worked as an environmental planner. I served in elected office for 8 years concurrently. And then I decided when I termed out of office to go back to school, and I got a law degree from the U of O.
Oh, wow.
Focused on water law and natural resource law.
Wow.
And then during that time, I clerked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and then also for a judge working on the Klamath water case in Klamath Falls, because that's a real contentious case. And then also worked as a city administrator. So I was doing that before, and then now I'm doing this full time.
Wow.
And it really, given the size of the district, it really does take a full time effort. In the first 3 months, I think from July to September, I put over 10,000 miles on my old Jeep, just driving around the district and talking to folks, going to fairs, going to powwows, going to just community meetings, and talking to folks and finding out, hey, what are the issues in your community and how can government help solve those issues?
Very cool. So now that kind of brings up a question that I think a lot of people who might be watching this interview would be asking. You are someone who is from Bend, or not Bend, but from Terrebonne, but in the Central Oregon area. How will you look out for the concerns of Eastern Oregon, of rural Eastern Oregon, if elected into office?
Yeah, well, it's showing up, it's finding out what those concerns are, and working on a day-to-day basis with local elected officials, with county officials to help solve the problems. It also takes, I think, having some background understanding of the experiences. So, when I was a kid, my first babysitter was a Shetland pony. And I could tell stories of when it got tired of me, when it would get rid of me and run me off. But I also, as a young person, I mucked stalls, I bucked hay. We had about 18 acres in Southern Oregon, just a really small, raised sheep and had some, small haying operation. And so those kind of experiences and understanding some of that day to day, I think is really critical to understanding people's experience, especially in the ag sector. Yeah. Also appreciating and understanding that it's really about how people put food on the table and coming at that with a real profound respect. So, if someone, whatever they do to care for their family, it's helping to support, working families and helping to support local farmers. There's a lot of really good ideas I think we're missing. And look at the current tax proposal. It's shifting the benefits and the resources from lower income folks to more wealthy folks. It's also not looking out for our family farms. So one of the ideas I think would be really good, and I've lifted this idea off of some rural farmers, is to have our tax structure be a 2-year rolling tax structure for folks who work in ag or whose livelihood depends on the weather. So if you have a bad crop year or a real bad weather year, you don't want to have you don't want to be driven out of business. Yeah. So those kind of things I think are things we can do to really help our local business, our local ag community and small farms.
Very cool.
The other thing, we were talking about infrastructure before. Small communities, rural communities want to diversify the businesses. So how can government help out in making sure we have access to internet. I mean, that's a huge growth potential for development of business, and even our ag sector. A lot of those pivot irrigation systems.
They're remote.
Phone.
You use your phone to turn them off and on. I've seen it in person. Yeah.
And if your internet system is not working, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, in that regard, I don't think that government should necessarily lay all the line, but needs to work in partnership with, but also needs to subsidize where necessary. And there's more of those types of subsidies that need to come to our rural areas that have not been coming to our rural areas. Democrats, but I think Republicans as well, have largely failed our rural and our small communities. And you mentioned the distinction between being a Dem or being a Republican. I was born and raised a Democrat. My grandparents worked in a factory. My mom's a teacher. They all worked really hard to put food on the table. They balanced the family checkbook. They worked hard to take care of their community. To me, those were democratic values.
Yeah.
When I talk to my friends who are raised Republicans, they will say virtually the same things and say those are Republican values. So I've been more talking about Oregon values.
Yeah,
that's what I think it's about.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So it's less about the Democrat and the Republican and more about location, just kind of where we're at and just who we are as a state and as a region.
That's what I think, because you find throughout this district, the Democrats are considered for the most part, moderate or more kind of conservative. And then there are a lot of Republicans. There's some conservative Republicans, but there's also a lot of Republicans who are just interested in fiscal responsibility, business, taking care of their families.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah,
there's a lot
absolutely,
of overlap.
Absolutely.
And I've been frustrated with my party at times, and so
I don't think you cannot be frustrated with your party at one time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's true for no matter which side of the line you're on. But I also, what I've heard from so many people, and especially this past summer, and from folks on both sides of the political fence, is that they're tired of the fighting.
Yeah.
Tired of the fighting.
Yeah.
Because it's just dividing us.
Yeah.
And we really need to come together to take care of our communities, care for our families, solve problems. That's what it's about.
Very cool.
So, yeah. And even on the healthcare thing, I mean, that's one of the big political battles we're having right now. Our community, our district, would have been devastated by the loss of healthcare. I met a woman who is a Republican, proud Republican, up in Gillum County, who is they're facing losing their family farm because her mom has a disease that is requiring a tremendous amount of attention. They don't have that money. And so we're going to see that, or we're potentially going to see that across our district. And I think in a wealthy country like ours, I think that's unconscionable. And that's part of what I believe to be our social infrastructure. It's not that people don't have to put skin in the game. I'm all about that. But at the same time, as much as people can, but we shouldn't be bankrupting people so they can care for their families. That's too much. Those are bad priorities.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing all your thoughts. I think we're kind of running out of time here, but I mean, I'm sure that we could sit here and talk about this for an hour. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe if you want to look at the camera and say, like, this is why you should vote for me, or just, what's something that maybe La Grande Live can take away from this,
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me come in to speak to you. I
really
appreciate it.
Downright
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it. I would encourage people to look at my website. It's McLeod-Skinner.com. That's McLeod-Skinner.com. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. And look at the website, look at my priorities, offer some suggestions, send me an email, call, offer ideas, because it's really about, like I said, bringing the best ideas to the table and having them go to Washington. I think we can be better served in Washington. No disrespect to folks who are engaged in public service, but be it healthcare, be it net neutrality, so we have some of the, be it internet security, be it the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement and Klamath Falls, the water agreement. There's a lot of areas where I don't believe we've been well served, and I'm committed to working with local communities to solve community problems and fighting that fight in Washington.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thank you, La Grande Live. We really appreciate you tuning in. This has been Coffee with Will, brought to you by Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Ronde Hospital, Anything to Digital, EONI, Valley Realty, Country Financial, and Schwab Tires. Please like and share the video and tune into LaGrandeLive.tv for more local content. I'm Will Bowman.